Okay, I think we'll get going here. You guys hear me? Yeah? Okay, perfect. All right, so welcome to What's New in Eclipse Che. My name is Micklea. I'm one of the project leads. This is Stevan Le Meur, who's a committer. So we're going to kind of tag team this, keep it interesting. All right, so it's been a very busy year for Eclipse Che. A lot has happened in the last year. As many of you know, Eclipse Che was launched in early 2016, and so it hasn't actually been officially around that long. But just in the past year, we added some instrumentation to Che to allow us to see how many hours people were working in their workspaces, as long as they're open to a public IP. Obviously, you can't see ones that are private or behind firewalls and stuff like that. But even just the public IPs, what we saw was pretty amazing and actually really, frankly, surprised us. That we saw 7 million hours of Che workspace usage just from those public IPs. We know that most of the very large organizations that are using Che today, of course, are invisible in this number. So we also are very lucky and thankful to the community for embracing Che. We've started out originally as a project with, I believe, 36 committers, if I'm remembering correctly, or contributors, pardon me. And since that time, it's grown quite rapidly. We're now at 98, and I'm confident we'll be at over 100 before the end of the year. So it's been fantastic to see how people have become engaged and started to really contribute. We've had some great contributions from folks like the Zend company who've added a ton of PHP support to Eclipse Che, really well beyond what we could have done on our own, which is fantastic to see. And have had a lot of other folks, kind of individuals and companies, get engaged as well. And we've always been kind of committed to a high cadence of releases. We want to make sure that we're continuing to bring new features out, new bugs. We want to make sure that things are rolling forward at a strong pace. And so we continued that with 34 releases so far this year. Of course, the year's not done. So we typically try and release every 2 weeks, but in some cases we have to do another extra release in between for things like bugs or urgent fixes, etc. So all told, probably a fix every 10 days, let's say, is roughly how we're tracking. So not bad. And some of you will know that there was an acquisition that has really kind of opened things up, not to over-pun it. But Codenvy was the original contributor of the Che project to the Eclipse Foundation. And in June of this year, Codenvy was acquired by Red Hat. And this is actually fantastic news because it has really enabled us to finally do what we had always wanted to do with Che. So many of you know that there was a model in place that was there by necessity, where Che was focused on single users, and Codenvy took Che and then added proprietary licensed code to allow it to be used by teams for scalability, for permissions, for security, for all these things that enterprises needed. And then, of course, enterprises would look at Che, get excited, play with it, and then come to Codenvy and buy from us. The Red Hat model is not the same one. Obviously, Red Hat doesn't have proprietary code. So we were excited, and they were excited to say, look, let's just take all that goodness from Codenvy and push it on up into the upstream open source Che project, which was exactly what we wanted to hear. And so Che 6, which is coming shortly, you can think of as kind of the open source Codenvy, if you will. It is all that and more. So just at a kind of a glance, there's a number of things that you can kind of focus on. So with Codenvy, we had multi-user support. Che was, of course, a single user system before. And that multi-user support is pretty critical because it was obvious from the architecture of Che that you had a server and you had workspaces and you had a browser. It was very obviously set up in a way that would make it usable by teams, by enterprises. This multi-user, we built our own OAuth and LDAP kind of capabilities into it. But now, this is actually an improvement in Che over Codenvy. We're using Keycloak, which is an open source authentication server, and does both OAuth and LDAP, frankly, far better than what we had in Codenvy. Multi-tenancy was another big one. How do you kind of scale horizontally to allow, as we have with some customers, hundreds of developers to use this as kind of their primary work environment? We use Docker Swarm, and as a small team, all we could support was that single infrastructure choice. And not every company had technology or technologists that could use Docker Swarm, that knew how to debug it and do anything with it. And so we created an SPI, a service provider interface, and that's going to allow us to be able to offer Che on top of Kubernetes, OpenShift, Docker, whatever people want. You could even, frankly, build something that did process forking if you wanted to just do it straight on the box. Factories were a big part of Codenvy. Now, they were already open sourced into Che, and we're in the process of consolidating the Che files and the factories together. They have some overlapping functionality, and we'll kind of keep the best of both in Che as we move forward. Now, I'm not going to talk about the teams and organizations or the infrastructure so much. Steven's going to cover that in a second. The last thing I wanted to cover is the only other piece of Codenvy that is not really coming over to Che is there were some plugins for Jira, VSTS, and Jenkins. They were used by our enterprise customers, but they weren't really everything that we wanted them to be, or as rich as we wanted them to be. So that's kind of a bit of a back burner for us in the Che world right now. They may come back later, but for now it's not our main focus because they were not used heavily by people. But if you are interested in those, and if you're interested in how Che can play in a larger cloud-native toolchain, I really suggest you take a look at Red Hat's OpenShift.io. It's pre-beta, there's a wait list for now, but it will be coming out of beta in the new year. And with that, I'll hand it over to Steven.
Yeah, thanks. So if Che was previously designed to be single user and single tenant, now it's really ready for teams and enterprises and for free, because before it was with Codenvy and now it's completely open source. So we had the multi-tenancy capabilities. We also integrate Keycloak, which allow you to connect with OAuth or integrate with your LDAP system. And this brings new teams and organization capabilities. So you have the ability to create a group of developers and to assign a certain set of permissions to those developers. And there is also other sort of capabilities, such as email notification. Another area where we are working on for Che 6 is the layout. So we are designing a layout which will be simpler and which will be less busy. So we are trying to remove a lot of the distraction that we had in the past layout, in order to focus the developer experience on the editing part of the product. And we also want to allow only typing experience, so you should be able to trigger any kind of actions from the IDE only by using your keyboard. So we will have a command palette inside of the IDE as well. And one of the good things that we work on as well is Che on OpenShift. So in the past, when you were deploying Codenvy on an enterprise, you had to manage that with the CLI that we were providing. Now we rely on the deployment platform to provide those capabilities. And inside of OpenShift, you have the OpenShift console where you can manage your Che installation, your Che deployment, and you can have an easier management, an elastic scalability, canary updates, and a lot of other built-in capabilities, such as an improved security, TLS support, and an embedded HA proxy, which we were handling ourselves in the past.
All right. So Che 6, which is what we were just talking about, is due to be released in the next several weeks. So you'll be able to start playing with that very, very shortly here. Just a quick note on the OpenShift side. Although we talked a lot about OpenShift here, as I stated, there is going to be support still for Docker and Kubernetes and other platforms as well. The important thing is that rather than having to learn a new management CLI with Codenvy, you now simply use the CLI or the API or the console that is provided with your container platform. All right, so what is next? What's coming after Che 6? What are we focused on now as a team? There's a hint here, I think, in the success of the language server protocol. So as you guys know, Codenvy, Red Hat, Microsoft came together and created this language server protocol, and it has really been a huge success. In fact, the JDT language server has been downloaded in the VS Code marketplace over 1.3 million times since its release, which tells you something about how much this has kind of been taken up within the industry. There's over 45 language servers available today, and that's again in a very short period of time. It's been less than a year since that was released, I believe, and just a huge amount of action already. Each week we kind of see new language servers appearing, more people focused on building language servers. This is going to continue to grow, so I think this is a great thing for all the IDEs that support this. So where I think this points is to a bit of a different world. So we have historically thought of an IDE as a monolithic application which helps us develop. All the pieces that I need are always all in my IDE together. And I'm using monolithic loosely here, of course, because it's still composed of plugins. What we need to get to, though, I believe, for a more cloud-native experience is a situation where we really are talking about IDE microservices that can be composed in a number of different ways, used and not used. So it's similar conceptually to the plugin model, but I think takes it another step further and makes it, again, a bit more cloud-native appropriate. So you could do a number of interesting things with this. We work a lot in GitHub, and in GitHub, when you have a pull request, there's that crummy little text editor that you can theoretically make changes in, but really no one does. No, it's not much, because it's a crummy little text editor. But imagine if you could have embedded in that page with every pull request a Che editor. And it had the syntax highlighting, and it could do all those things that your IDE can do. And then if you really needed to have a terminal, and you really needed to actually run something or build something, you could simply kind of pop it out into a full-blown Che IDE. It's all in your browser. It's all quite possible. So there's a ton of things that you can start to do when you start thinking of these components of an IDE as microservices, as things that can be embedded inside of other things. Starting Che from inside your container platform, embedding links to a running Che workspace with the code available for the branch directly from an email from Jenkins or from the pull request comments in a GitHub PR. All these things can really change the way we as developers interact with the code, the way we interact with each other, the way we interact as a community. I think that's incredibly powerful and extremely exciting. So that's the kind of big picture of what we're thinking about. But we know that we can't do this alone. So we're going to be starting a new working group focused on cloud-native tooling. We want to bring the community together and begin really planning, what does this look like? What are the right ways for us to do this? What are the right protocols? How do we make sure that there is interchange and connectability and maintainability of this going forward? So that's coming, and we're super excited about that. So that's one big thing. A little bit more in the immediate, though. I'll let Steven talk about some of the things we're planning now.
Yeah, and in fact, if you think about it, we already did a lot in this cloud-native application context. And inside of Che Workspace, as you might know, we rely on containers to provide all the dependencies that you need in order to build, to code, to test, and to run your project. So it makes the developer workspace very portable and easy to be shared, easy to be instantiated. nothing to install, everything is packaged inside of the container. And how it works within Che is that we have three main components. So we have the Workspace server on the right, which is handling user management, the permission system, security and file storage, but more importantly, it's the orchestrator of the Workspace containers. So it generates the containers for the workspaces, and inside of those containers we are injecting all the tooling that we are using. So we are injecting language servers and API, and we rely on those components inside of the browser IDE to provide the developer features and the developer capabilities. For example, the Orion editor relies on the language server that is running inside of the Workspace container. And it's the same for all the features that we have inside of panels, menus, and the different widgets of the IDE. And all of this is extensible. So any part of Che is extensible. Che can be completely white label as a completely separate product and having its own release cycle. We have a few experience on that and few customers who did that in the past. So all the server side is Java, and on the client side it's Git. We have also the dashboard, which allows to manage your workspace and manage your teams as well. And this is a TypeScript and AngularJS application. So yeah, Che is extensible, but Che makes the extensibility very hard. So if you want to contribute to Che, the experience is very complex. It's difficult to set up your developer environment, and even if you succeed to set up this developer environment, then when you do some changes, you have to rebuild almost everything in order to see those changes. So it makes the turnarounds quite slow, and the debugging experience is also kind of funky. So in fact, if you really want to contribute to Che, if you want to contribute anything, you need to understand everything. So that's a problem, and another problem is that white labeling Che is one way to extend it, but it's not really extending an existing Che. It does not provide any mechanism to add a new plugin to your Che that is running on your cloud. It does not provide any package mechanism for the plugin, and the plugins are having a life cycle that is really linked to the life cycle of Che itself. So there is no really dynamic mechanism, and it's really monolithic in the approach. So let's put a stamp on that, and we learned that we really need to work on that, and Che needs a different and better extensibility approach. So what we are going to do, we are going to improve that, and the way we see that for the server side is that we will package all the different tools that are providing developer services as sidecar containers. So it means that you will have your application stack for your project, and on top of this application stack, we will run in parallel sidecar containers, and those sidecar containers will provide profiling, debugger, language servers capabilities for Che. We will start with the language servers, and the language server will be packaged as a container, and they will bring their own dependency. So if you think about it today, inside of VS Code, when you install the JDT language server, for example, it requires you to install a JVM on your machine. That's not something that you probably want to do. So what we want to allow with this notion of sidecar containers is that it will provide all the dependency and run in an isolated way. It will also have its own life cycle. It will be much easier to upgrade and simpler to package. And of course, because all of this is running in the cloud, it enables scalability of the tools as well.
Just before you go on, one thing I'd also like to point out too is that by doing sidecars, what we do now is that when you have your recipe for your production application, we actually inject agents into that container. And those agents execute many of these tasks. So in some ways, we're kind of polluting the environment from what it would exist in production. With the sidecars, it makes it a much cleaner delineation between your app and the tools that go into it.
So this will also enable you to bring server component with the technology of your choice. So the way it will run is that we will define IDEs protocol, such as the language server protocol, the debugger server protocol, but we definitely, as part of the working group, will think about what are the other protocols that we need to think about. We will support those protocols on the platform, and then you will be able to implement the servers with the technology of your choice. So, for example, you can write a PHP language server in PHP if you want. And we will package those servers as containers and run them as sidecars along with your application stack. That's for the server side. On the client side, we also want to allow you to use the technologies of your choice and not do only JWT. So the way we will improve the extensibility is by adding extension points. So those extension points will allow you to configure new actions inside of menu, add new panel, add new editor capabilities, and if you want to bring a new panel with your own front-end technologies, that will be possible. The extension point will allow that. So the way we will define the extension points is by looking at how we can have a compatibility with the other IDEs, such as TIA or VS Code. So we will define that it's currently in progress, basically. Another aspect, we also, if we want to get more plugins and more contributors and get engagement from the community, we learn that we need to make the contributor experience a bit more fun. So we will provide some kind of toolings to help you to bootstrap your Che plugin. That will be CLI based. We will also provide some tools to package the language server and the other servers to Che. And we will add a developer mode inside of Che, so you will be able to develop Che extension within Che and have a host mode, such as you are used to get inside of Eclipse. So once you have a plugin, really what matters is where you publish it. So we will create a Che plugin registry, and we will have some statistics on this registry. And we were discussing with a colleague just before the presentation about making some gamification around that, so that could be pretty exciting. But once you have a public registry in the context of Che that is designed to go into developer teams in enterprises, you want to have an in-house marketplace for your own enterprise. So you want to cherry pick exactly the plugins that you want to make available for your teams. So the administrator of Che will have the ability to configure what are the plugins that are available for which team, and the teams will have the capability to enable or disable the plugins if they want. And last but not least, we definitely need to better communicate with the community, and we there's no way we will be able to do that without leveraging all the experience that everyone is in this room is having about what is a platform and how to make this platform easily extensible, robust. So we will much more engage with the Che community, and we will author some specifications that we will publish, and we'll ask the community to review and to help us to be driven in the right direction, the one that you guys are looking for. And that will be also a big part of our engagement with the community will take place as well in the new working group that we are building. And of course, we have still resources on our Eclipse Che website. So we have a bi-weekly community call that you can join. It's each Monday at 5 p.m. Time here. And we publish the topics, the agenda of the call on the wiki of Che, and you will find all the information to join this call on our website and on our Git repository. And we also have a Mattermost channel, which is under Eclipse Mattermost. So definitely feel free to ping us in this channel. I think that's cover most of what we are targeting is Che 6 and what are our future plans. So thank you. Have you got any questions?
Have you envisioned footprint with the Sidecars containers relative to the current engine approach?
So we are looking at doing a fast approach, function as a service. So this way we will spin up the containers only when we need it. So we will trigger some events, and we want to try a serverless approach for that.
Other questions? All right, straightforward, I guess. Yeah.
Any feedback on this approach? I guess if you want to share feedbacks, we have a booth, so we can discuss there.
All right, thanks very much, guys.